This is Long Way to the Top, and I'm your host, Shane Bryan. In the words of the immortal AC/DC, it is harder than it looks. These interviews will give you a glimpse into the lives of the artists that we've sung along with, danced and rocked out to. Some go deep into their past and others celebrate their recent releases. But all of them show that regardless of who you are, it's always a long way to the top. What do Shania Twain, Rose Tattoo, the Party Boys, and Bonnie Tyler all have in common? Our next guest on Long Way to the Top, Randall Waller, has been a guitarist for many big artists and is the only Aussie so far to perform at the Super Bowl. With a promising band in the 80s called Avion, the group disbanded when tragedy struck, causing Randall to begin a journey from frontman to guitarist for some of the biggest artists in the world. Now, 40 years on, Randall's just released a brand new album called More, and he joins me on the show this week. How are you, Randall?
I'm so good, mate. I'm so happy.
What a journey you've been on.
Thank you, Shane. Yeah, it's been a journey, mate. Wow. I suggested to my wife at one point, how about we call the album Journeyman or something like that? But that had already been done. Clapton, I think, did that.
Yeah, just a little album.
Yeah, it's a bit old. It's a bit done. And she thought it was a bit old and whatever. She'd never heard the term before, and because she's much younger than me, you know, of course.
Of course. That's rock and roll.
But, yeah, mate, it's this album is kind of autobiographical. Look, when you say autobiographical, that means that sort of intimates some kind of like chronological timeline, which it doesn't really have, but it is a life statement.
Yeah.
And it encapsulates my feelings on many, many things. I was almost going to call it SPR, just those three letters, SPR, sex, politics, religion, the three things that you're never meant to talk about, which this album talks about all the time.
Yeah.
But then that might have alienated people as well. So I don't know, mate. You know, but it's certainly a life statement. Yes.
I first came across you when you were in Avion, and as a, I'm going to say 18-year-old kid back then.
I was young. It wasn't quite that young. I think I was, so let me think, 22 with my two beautiful brothers. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, for me, it was a good bridging for me personally, coming out of a religious background into rock and roll, and that was kind of your story, yeah.
Yeah, same. Yeah, same. Yeah, so we had, so I had done a couple of like, you know, independent little records in that domain prior to Avion, and when we came out with our first Avion album, which we were signed to RCA, and we were the first band ever. Like, I was thinking about this today. It's strange. I don't think it's any sort of major hallmark, really, but they made a big fuss of it at the time. They said we were the first band ever to be signed to a worldwide deal with RCA, and we thought, oh, wow, like we're the shit. How amazing are we, you know? But it didn't mean anything really. And then we heard that there was some church out west that were having burnings. They were having like literally burnings of our album, where everyone could bring the Avion album and throw it on a bonfire. And
why is that?
And mate, I look back on it and I think, my gosh, you know, after the things I've seen since then, it's about 40 years. And I think of the things I've seen since then, and I look back at us in that environment, and I think we were such good boys.
Yeah.
Like, I'm still a good boy.
I don't believe that for a minute.
Okay. So, no, I'm largely a good fella, like, in terms of the normal morals of normal society. But I think back then, and look at how we conducted ourselves back then, we never took sexual advantage of anybody. And oh man, I just think, man, you guys don't know what you're talking about,
Yeah.
And it drove me away from the church more so than I would have already, aside from, everything else that happens in life that drives you away from this kind of very neat pigeonholed mentality where if you ABC, well, then XYZ is going to happen. Well, sorry, that's not happened for me, and it's never has. And I believed, and I was committed, and I thought it was the right thing to do, and because I've been brought up in it, and now I think I was just led up the garden path, and well, life just does that to you, and now I still have core beliefs that I will not let go of, but at the same time, I think I was fucked over by that whole. It was a culture.
Yeah, and a fickle one at that, like you said.
Culture.
Yeah, like you said, the moment that someone gets wind of, oh, you've become too rock and roll, or you've gone to the dark side.
That's it. Well, then, but at the same time, we heard that the Sydney Rock Station wouldn't play us because we'd done our own show at the Capitol Theatre, and they thought that was 3/4 sold out at the Capitol, in 1983, and they said, well, that was only because they trucked in, heaps of church people from out west, and there was people bought tickets and they came along and heard us because we had it was a top 20 album in the country, and so we put on our own show at the Capitol Theatre, and so they viewed that with suspicion and didn't believe that it could be real. Mind you, I'd already been playing in that environment for many years, and some people didn't like it and went and burned their records, and other people came along and went along for the ride. So, and so we were too rock and roll for the church. That's for sure. And we were cut off on a couple of occasions. We'd finished. We'd barely gotten through. We hadn't actually gotten through our third song, and I remember a couple of people came down. So no, and they pulled the power. It was, no, cut that off. Yeah, oh yeah, that was twice. Twice that happened, and then we were too church for rock and roll, and still people say, "Well, Avion, they were a Christian band, weren't they?" Well, I don't know how anyone knew because we never mentioned a word about it in anything or any interview or anything ever, and I'm not ashamed of that. It was just, well, so what? We came out of church. We grew up in church. Okay.
Who cares? Yeah.
Okay. Who cares? What? Okay. How did you grow up? Were you taken to Sunday school? And they probably would have said, "Oh yeah, I probably was." Well, fuck. What's the problem? We were a square peg in a round hole in both environments.
You even appeared on Countdown.
Oh, multiple times, yeah. Many times, yeah.
How was that received?
Actually hosted it once. I got to say good night Australia.
Night Australia.
Jenny Morris and that guy from the Drop Bears. I don't know what his name was. And I don't know. Jenny didn't like me for whatever. I was probably a bit of a young upstart, I suppose. I don't know, but she didn't like me at all. But I didn't get to say goodnight, Australia. So
that's all right. That's the main thing.
Whatever. I don't know.
How was it received on Countdown? Good?
Oh, I thought it was good, and as I said, our first album went top 20 Australia wide. But that was pretty good. I thought that was good. We were on our way down to, we live on the northern beaches in Sydney, and we were on our way down to a gig down in, I think it was Caringbah Inn or something like that, and we pulled into that Shell service station on the side of the Princes Highway there, and we heard our song on the radio for the very first time. It was a huge buzz. It was, it was just big for us kids, that we were kids,
There was an accident, and Evan, the keyboardist.
Beautiful Evan. We all loved Evan. Evan, we always said, mate, when are you going to get your license? I don't know how old he was. He was probably 23-ish. By the time we were doing this, it was 87. And we had a week of opening for Dragon all around Sydney and Wollongong, Newcastle. And it was a lovely experience because we got on really well with the Dragon boys, particularly Alan and Tommy. Tommy's still a good mate, and Tommy Emmanuel. And what a freak, man. What a freak.
Incredible guy.
Just force of nature. He's just somewhere else. So we'd done a show down at Shell Harbour, and we're on our way back, and apparently, so Paul was the other guitar player, Paul Janelle, and he had driven Evan down there, but Evan lived very close to where my two brothers lived, and he said, "Hey guys, can I get a ride home with you guys, because it would take Paul out of his way to go home, that way." And they said, "Sure, but it's only a panel van, so you have to just lie in the back." He said, "Yeah, no, that's fine." And so my younger brother was driving, and my middle brother was in the passenger seat, and a drunk driver came out from a stop sign and just T-boned, and they spun around, and Evan flew out of the back. And myself and my then wife, who I'm still great mates with, bless her heart, we happened upon this carnage on the road in Sutherland, and strange thing is Johnny Canis was there. That's weird. Yeah, and he was very kind. Thank you, Johnny.
Johnny Canis
from the Hitmen. Yeah. I'll never forget that. And so obviously we pulled over, and I walked up to the scene of the crash, and my brother, my middle brother, walked down to me. He said, funny, he said, the first thing he said was, "Kendall's fine." It's my youngest brother. He said, "Kendall's fine," because he knew that would be, I guess he instinctively knew that would be foremost in my mind. And he said, "Kendall's fine." He said, "But Evan's not good. Evan's pretty bad." So we went directly, and we were only 10 minutes behind them. So in that time, the ambulance had already come and taken him to Sutherland Hospital. So we went there, and they said, no, he's not going to make it. So that that was that, and that was pretty much the end of Avion, as we knew it then. That was the 12th of September, I guess, early hours of the 13th of September.
Yeah.
80. Bless his heart, and we just loved Evan. We gave him hell, but we gave each other hell,
That's what a band's all about, isn't it?
You just give each other shit, and we did. But he was a beautiful soul, yeah. So that was it was a tragedy, and that was the end of Avion. And so then I went on to at that point we were managed by Steve White, who was also managing Dragon, and he was putting together a band that would do this rock and roll rodeo show. So if you can imagine, how they did what they did with motocross. They brought motocross instead of it being out in the bush somewhere, they brought it into stadiums and they called it Supercross, and they wheeled in tons and tons and tons of dirt, and they made jumps and everything, right? So the idea was, well, why don't we do that with rodeo? And so there would be 4 teams, and there'd be laser lights, and there'd be dancing girls, and there'd be a band there playing, and blah, blah, blah. And so the idea was that we'd go up to Bangkok and we'd start this thing called Satellite Cowboys. And so we get up. I'd recorded this theme song before we went up there, Satellite Cowboys, and with cowboy hats on. I was so I've never seen it again since, thank goodness. But they sent it up there, and it was on high rotation in Bangkok, right, in Thailand. And so when we got there, we would go and walk around Robertson's, or any of the major department stores, and people would see me and they go, and the little, Thai girls, would go,
yeah.
It's like tennis court-sized billboard saying Satellite Cowboys, sponsored by Coca-Cola. All the Coca-Cola bottles had Satellite Cowboys on the caps. Mate, it was ridiculous, except it was sponsored by a few guys that were of notorious reputation, and they wanted to bypass the local promoters. And so the promoters, who were in bed with the government, as soon as the saddles arrived for the horses that were already dying out at the safari park, they'd flown a whole 747 full of cows and bloody horses and everything, and they were all dying up, from heat and dehydration. When the saddles arrived, we need $250,000 deposit on these things because you'll probably sell them once they. Yeah. Anyway, we never did a show. And so from then, the whole thing disbanded. Most people went back to Australia, and me and my wife and my brother, we went on to England. Her family was from there, and that started my 5-year sojourn in the UK. Yeah.
And working with Bonnie Tyler.
Bonnie, darling Bonnie. Yeah. Funny, I saw her just a few years ago. She was here just like 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. And I introduced her to my now wife, and she said, "Hey, Randall," she's a Welsh housewife. She's just a funny bird and just gold. And she says, "Hey, Randall, how did you score this broad? How did you do that?" She says, "You're ugly and she's beautiful." She's funny. And I said to her, Bon, I said, I told someone your one and only joke this morning. She says, "Oh, no, not the one about the egg." I said, "Yes, that's the only one." And so her only joke is, she says, "I told someone today too." I said, and she says, I said, "You need to tell Susie. Tell Susie." And so she says, "Okay, so there's 2 eggs in a pot. And one egg says to the other, 'Hey, it's fucking hot in here, isn't it?' And the other one says, 'Oh, don't worry about that. Wait till you get out. They smash your head in.'" And that's her joke. That's it. That's all she's got. Bless her heart. Yeah. But I have a photograph of her in the presidential suite at the Moscow Hotel, right beside Red Square, where she's writes on the wall, "Totally pissed as a fart," as opposed to total eclipse of the heart. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. She's a funny bird, and she's gold. Yeah, beautiful.
What was it like playing songs that you obviously, would have known?
Yeah. Wow. No, I didn't know. But mate, I've got to put a caveat on that. When I first started with her, I was just crewing. I was just a guitar tech. That's all I was. I needed a gig because, we just landed there unannounced, and through a friend of a friend of a friend, I heard that, Bonnie Tyler needs a guitar tech. Well, I can do that, And so I was guitar teching for her. That's all I was doing. Yeah. And we were in Norway for 6 weeks, and then we were in the Persian Gulf for 2 or 3 weeks, and then we were in Russia for a couple of months. Russia, Lithuania, but this was Soviet Russia. This is end of '88. We were in Greece and went around the islands, and it was just surreal for a little kid from Sydney. It was just quite extraordinary. But her manager heard me playing one day when I was just setting gear up, and he said, "Oh, well, what's your story?" And I, started to tell him, and he's still a good friend of mine, Dave Aspin, and he ended up managing me. And long story short, we ended up showcasing several times for Muff Winwood, Steve Winwood's brother, who was the A&R guy for Sony at the time. Got real close to a solo deal there, but just didn't happen. So, it is what it is. And a couple of those songs still appear on this record. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And, I know we're going through your, a bit of your history here, but
yeah,
it's interesting because knowing the songs and hearing the songs,
yeah,
your history is so evident in your new music.
Well, that's, like I say, it's a life statement. It's I feel like it's a pretty honest record. I think it's a pretty honest bunch of songs, and I'm not trying to hide anything. My church upbringing, my relationships, my
partying,
my partying and whatever, it is what it is. And so, yeah, party like a rock.
Yeah, great song. Hey, tell me, how did you feel going into, you've gone through Bonnie Tyler and you've worked with bands in Australia like John English, Yeah,
I love John. He was a good guy.
Great guy.
He was a good fella, and that's where I met my now wife. It's funny. It's funny with John because that's where I met Susie, who you met earlier, but before we started recording. But I ran into him maybe only 18 months before he passed at an airport. We were both going to different gigs, and we ran into each other, and he said, "Oh, right. Hey, Rand, how you going?" Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm just going up to do a show with her. So I was like, with this and that and the other. And I was just waiting for him to ask me, like, "So you and Suze, right?" And at that point we had 3 kids.
Yeah.
And we'd met when she was the co-lead of that show that we did with him. It was a show that was, the premise of the show was, I'm this blonde. The way they wanted to portray it was, I'm a blonde bimbo and I want a career in entertainment. So who better to ask than John English? And so he would say, "Oh, well, the first thing you do, you get a part in a musical, da 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 da," and we do a couple of Jesus Christ Superstar things. And it was an excuse for him to showcase everything he's done. So after we did that, he'd say, "Well, then you get a part in a mini series. What was it? 6 Ribbons." And then he'd say, "So then you put a rock band together and you have a couple of hit songs, and then you do this and that, and so it was all scripted." And he would be bouncing off him up front, and I was a guitar player, and she was all over me like a rash, and I just felt sorry for her.
I'm sure. That's the story. We'll stick to that.
We'll stick to the anyway. Yeah.
How did the connection with you and Shania come about?
Yeah, crazy. So during that same time, in fact, maybe a year before I first met Susie on the road with John, Paul DeMarco, who I'd mentioned, who I played with in Rose Tattoo, I'd already done a couple of other things with him as well. So he'd been asked to pull a band together for Billy Thorpe. It was Steve, and he had a couple of guitar players in mind, and it was myself and Steve Edmonds. And I'd already known Steve from way back, and Billy ended up saying, well, why don't we have them both? So it was a 3-guitar band with Billy, myself, and Steve.
Wow.
DeMarco and Andy Seashon. And we had a bit of a bromance going on because he played with James Rain and Daryl Braithwaite, and he played on their albums, and he'd had his own band, Judge Mercy, right? But he'd had enough of that. He'd just come out of a long-term relationship, and he said, look, my best mate is personal trainer and security for Billy Joel. So if I go over to New York, he's rarely ever in his apartment there, and I can just stay there and maybe at some point, maybe I'll get an audition with Billy, maybe. Yeah. And so he took off. That was April 97. And, we were still playing, and I was still playing with John. I was still playing, but Billy didn't like the fact that I was playing with John still, so he got someone else. And come the end of that year, we started doing some shows called The Boys Are Back, and it was the old sort of 80s rock bands, and there were shows like with Radiators and Choir Boys and us and Spy vs. Spy and usual suspects. Yeah. We were on the road one day going up the North Coast, and I get a call from Andy, and he says, hey, look, I had already mentioned to him that, look, I'd love to come over because my biggest hero really in recording history is Mutt Lange because of Back in Black. And, look, Highway to Hell too, not so much, but Back in Black particularly. And then everything from then was, Pyromania, Hysteria for Def Leppard, and then Bryan Adams and all of that. And so, he was just one of my all-time heroes. And I had mentioned to Andy, look, I'd just love to come over. I'd like just 5 minutes just to, wear his ear off, And anyway, so he called a little while later when we were on our way up the coast, and he said, were you serious about coming over? Because I reckon I could get you an audition. For what? He said, for Shania. And I had heard her records, of course, and I went, oh, okay, yeah, all right, yeah, okay. Yeah, maybe I will. And he said, look, what you need to do is send over this and that and the other, record this and send over anything that you've done recently. And so I did that, and it was FedEx, and, it cost $80. And, to a musician back then in 97, it was
a lot of money.
It was, it mattered. And so, so I sent all that over, and Andy called me eventually, and he said, yeah, Mutt likes it. He said, you're definitely the best singer that we've heard from, but we're trying to find someone local. So I thought, yeah, that's right. I've never won a meat raffle, so that was it. And that was sort of around about January, February of 98. And I thought, either, I'll hear from them I knew their first show was late May, and I thought, well, I'll hear from Andy, saying, yeah, we found someone in, April, we found someone or whatever. Or maybe in early April, I'll hear from them and they'll say, get your ass over here,
Quickly, yeah.
This is what I'm fantasizing in my head.
Yeah, of course.
Sure enough, early April, Andy calls. He says, okay, so we've got another guy here at the moment. He's not going to last. No one likes him. He's an asshole. And so he said, what you need to do, you need to record you playing Man, I Feel Like a Woman. Dun, 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 play that. I thought, and he said, yeah, no one seems to be able to play it right. I thought,
Really?
Okay, do that and put the record on one side, put you on the other side so they can isolate it. I thought, okay, fine. And have you sing from this moment to the record, sing the other part, the duet part, right? So sing that and send it over. And I thought, oh, come on. And that was on a Sunday. And I just finished a weekend with John, and all my gear was in a truck up the Central Coast. And so I had to, oh, good Lord, like, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to go up and find the truck, like go to the production manager guy and say, mate, I need to dig my gear out of the truck and take it back. And it got to Wednesday, and my mum came out to the car one day. I was about to go off somewhere, and she said, you need to pursue that. You need to do that.
Yeah.
Just make sure it happens. Oh. I got to Thursday. I was informed of it as Sunday, right? It gets to Thursday. I thought, all right. So I call the guy. I said, man, I'm coming up. I've got to get my gear. Drive, an hour and a quarter up the coast. Dig my gear out of a damn, Marshall box and whatever. Take it all the way back home. I had a 16-track digital recorder. And you're like, okay. And I had a 57, just an SM57. I said, okay, hello, Mutt. Hello, everyone. I took it with a grain of salt. It's like, because, it's a chook raffle to me. It's like nothing like this happens to me. Like so here it is. I'm playing guitar. Put the mic right down to it. And I'm going to sing into the same thing. Here we go. Ready? And played it all the way through. And then I sang the thing and sent it over. And so that was the Thursday. I got it to the FedEx, to the Australia Post / FedEx thing. They sent it off on that Thursday night. I got it there at 10 to 5. Following Wednesday, I'm setting up. I'm loading into a studio to do a couple of days of guitars for some different project. And I get a phone call as I'm loading in. I get a phone call, and it's George Travis, who Andy had told me about. Because in that interim, I did mention that he had gone over there hoping to get the audition with Billy, but as it turned out, he got the Shania gig, and he did Letterman that was his audition, basically.
Wow.
And he kept saying to Mark, I've got the guy. They needed a lead guitar player and a lead singer who wasn't going to be the lead guitar player and wasn't going to be the lead singer. So because there was another guitar player who was already there doing all the lead parts, and so I had a few moments and stuff here and there, but he eventually left, and I took up the slack. He had told me, Andy had told me about George Travis, who was the tour director, not the tour manager. He was the tour director. He pulled all the pieces together, the lights, PA, and, band members and everything. And so I get this phone call as I'm loading into the studio. He says, hello, is this Randall Waller? And I said, yeah. Says, hey, Randall, this is George Travis calling. So I said, yeah, George, I know who you are. Yeah, Andy clued me in and all of that. He says, oh, okay. So whatever you put on that tape was enough for Mutt to have me call you and find out what you're doing and, and all of that. And so when I there. He said, is it okay if Mutt calls you on this number? He's got some musical questions for you.
No, yes, absolutely. Do it.
So I go back into the studio and I put my phone down and I said, if anyone touches that phone, I will kill them. Right? Because Mutt Lange is going to call me on this phone. Do you all hear? Mutt Lang will call me on this phone. I put the phone down and it starts ringing. I went overseas. I went, hello. And I was shaking like a leaf, mate.
Yeah.
And so I went outside and I said, mate, look, I've got to get this out of the way, right? Like, first up, because I might never have another opportunity to speak to you ever again. I said, I love everything you've ever done. I love Back in Black. I love Def Leppard. I love, all of that. I even love Romeo's Daughter, which is probably the only record you've ever done that probably didn't sell more than 1 million copies. And I know every note of that record. And he just laughed. He says, oh, that's great, Randall. Thank you so much. That's so good. And then he asked me musical questions. And he said, okay, so we've got this song that's called No One Needs to Know. And it's got a bit of yodel in it. It says, and so your part would go in the key of C. He goes, so I'm not loved anymore at night. And he said, so can you do that bit of a yodel? And so I did that on the phone,
Yeah.
I said, yeah, I think that's okay. All right. So, and then the last chorus, it goes up a tone. It goes up to D. Can you, so I'm not loved. Sorry to the people that have perfect pitch, because I don't. And so I said, oh, yeah, mate, I can do D, like in full voices, like, And he goes, yeah, okay. But okay, can you do that, though, for me, please? Like, dead straight, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. Okay. I'm being, mate, I was somewhere else. And so he says, well, okay, well, that's great, Randall. I'm happy to go along with this then. I'm happy to sign off on this. So I'll get George to call you and you can make arrangements. I look forward to meeting you. I just go... I went, okay, all right then. And so George gets back on the phone like 30 seconds later, says, okay, so can you leave tomorrow? And I said, no, I'm sorry, George. No, I can't. I'm playing with this band. I'm playing with John English and we've got gigs lined up and I can't just, leave them in the lurch. And so he says, okay, well, we've got some other guys that we're gonna audition over the weekend, and Mutt had said, "I'm happy to go ahead with this. I'll get George to make the arrangements." And so George gets back. He says, "I've got some other guys," and if so, he said, "When you come in, just come in on a tourist visa, and then if you're the guy." Then I've got an immigration lawyer and we can make that happen from this end. I said, hey, George. He goes, yeah. He's still a great mate of mine. I saw him just a couple of years ago, a bunch of photos with him. He goes, yeah. I said, I'm the guy. And he says, that's what the other 25 said. There were 25 before me.
Wow.
Yeah. So how lucky was I that they weren't able to turn the right stone? Because America's made of these people, people like me. Anyway, so sure enough, so get over there and we were uncertain for the first few days because I had this kind of weird thing. Well, Mutt said he's happy to go ahead, but then George said, well, if you're the guy, well, and so then there's the lead guy who has the credit card to buy gear for everyone, and I'd heard these matchless amps that are hand-wired amps, and I was like, oh, they're unbelievable. And I said, oh, I just want a couple of those. They're expensive. And they're like, no one's doing anything about me. I'm just I arrive in New York City, we get on a bus and we go up to their compound up in upstate New York and we're rehearsing there and they look at me and they say, what do you want to do? Because they're all there. They've all been flown in for the week just for me to bring me up to speed, which I didn't know until like months later. I had no idea. I thought they were just there rehearsing like they had been since January. This is April, end of April. So so one day we're rehearsing, and I've got this splitting headache. I think it's a Friday morning. I'd gotten up there on Tuesday, and it's a Friday morning. I'd rehearsed like Tuesday night, all day Wednesday, all day Thursday, Friday morning. My head's splitting. I'm jet lagged and everything. And we break for a cup of tea at 10 o'clock in the morning. We rehearsed 14 hours a day. It was just heavy. And we went down to the green room. They call it the great room. It was a huge room. And there's Mutt and Shania sitting there in this gigantic chair. And I thought, this is just freaking surreal, you know. And Mutt says, so Randall, do we have some gear? Do we have some? Because he's South African, right? But English educated. And do we have some gear ordered for you on the way? I only took over one guitar, you know. Mm-hmm. And do we have some gear ordered for you? And I'd already mentioned to this guy, Kevin, my guitar tech, who, you know, he had the credit card and had the ability to buy and sell and whatever. And I heard these matchless amps, and I said, I need it. I want a couple of those. He says, well, they're very expensive, Randall, you know. And he said, what's wrong with these Fender things? And I've never gotten along with Fender amps. I'm the natural enemy of Fender amps. I can't make them sound good. I hear other people that make them sound good. It's never me. So respect, but, you know, I can't go there. I said, no, I need these. And he was very reticent to do that. And so I said to Mutt, when he said, do we have some gear ordered for you? And I said, well, Kevin seems reticent to, I had to pick my words so carefully, to buy anything, because I guess there's uncertainty as to whether I'm the guy, you know.
Suitable.
Yeah, am I the guy? And Mutt just said straight away, he says, oh, man, you're the guy. Like, otherwise we wouldn't have brought you over here. And he kind of stops halfway. He goes, okay, come with me. And so we walk the, 100 meters through their house, down to the studio, their home studio, still the biggest studio I've ever been in. And he goes, hey, Kevin. And Kevin's over the other side of the room. He says, Kevin, he's the guy. Get him whatever he wants, anything, whatever you want. And Mutt turns around and looks at me and gives me a wink and goes, and walks off and goes back to his cup of tea, you know. So I said to Kevin, right. And so, yeah, it went from there. Yeah, it was surreal, mate.
What a journey.
Surreal for me, good Lord, from Blacktown RSL and, oh, gosh. And thank you, Andy. I cannot thank Andy Cichon enough. He put his head on the block because he believed that I could do it, and I did do it, and I could do it. And I guess it's a little bit like my wife has done a bunch of movies, and back in the day, early days, as soon as she got out of university, and she would often be asked, well, how did you get that? Did your agent get you that? And she would say, well, my agent got me the audition, but I got the part. So
100%.
I suppose, Andy got me the audition, but he had his head on the block, for them to fly me over and for him to vouch for me in such a way. I was like forever grateful, and it changed my life.
That was our guest today on the show, Randall Waller. Now, 20 years later, he has a brand new album out called More, which showcases both his singing and guitar skills. As a fan of his work, I love the album and its many different shades and styles. One of the standout tracks is this one, Alpha State.
Golden divine, the future to share was yours and mine, and every cloud was silver line. Far, far from home, what we could hold was all we owned. We
That is Alpha State, and if you want to hear the rest of the album more, head over to bandcamp.com and search for Randall Waller. All the links to Randall's music are in the description as well. Make sure you press plus or follow to be notified of new interviews. Until next week, remember, it doesn't matter who you are, it is always a long way to the top.